February 2011, The New Yorker publishes staff writer Lawrence Wright's 25,000-word piece on the Church of Scientology. It's a story Wright had been working on for almost a year, interviewing, researching, dotting every I, crossing every T, getting every last fact just right. Or so he might like us to think. Because in fact, much of Wright's investigative reporting actually comes from a handful of seamy and disreputable websites on the lunatic fringe. Oh, and he did talk to a half dozen or so excommunicated Scientology apostates, many of whom also happen to be admitted perjurers and criminals. Yes, these were his sources. And Lawrence Wright not only listened to their lies, but ran with them. This should come as no surprise, given Wright is on record for having said, "Truth is one of those subjective terms that are pointless to get too tied up about." It's also no surprise that Wright would turn down church offers of open access to any church facility for a story about Scientology, while instead taking a trip to the rural Texas headquarters of a six-man cult led by a psychotic who dubs himself Kingpin. He's the same man who nearly killed his best good buddy with his bare hands before sticking his fist in his then-wife's face. But he did get a new wife and then spent his honeymoon in jail. He also got himself a chauffeur in the bargain, because that very same best good buddy was behind the wheel when Kingpin lost it again. This time with a reporter who posed a question the cult leader didn't care to answer. But just a few weeks later, Wright receives a different reception when he interviews Kingpin. In fact, the two hit it off, becoming more than just a reporter and his source. They're also now buddies. They're hanging together. They're shooting the breeze. And that's how Wright conducted what he calls an investigation. It's nothing more than hack tabloid journalism, unworthy of a high school newspaper, much less the prestigious New Yorker. But had Wright done the job of a proper journalist, he would have discovered what was actually happening in the world of Scientology, during which he was too busy hanging with the self-proclaimed posse of apostates. Yes, had he cared to tell the truth, somewhere in his 25,000-word diatribe, he could have told his readers any of this. All began with the ribbon-cutting and grand opening of the church's fully restored religious retreat in Clearwater, Florida. It's the church's spiritual headquarters, drawing parishioners from 120 nations, and also serving the local community for hundreds of civic events. While even more than that, completion of the project signaled the start of the last phase of expansion and commencement of final construction of the church's new Mecca. We then saw the commencement of a global program to open new ideal churches of Scientology in every major city across 5 continents. The most extensive expansion project of any church on earth. This one in the ancient Swedish seaport at Malmö. There, it was a new 72,000 square foot Scientology church on a classic northern parkland for the people of Scandinavia. Next, and just a week later, it was Dallas, Texas, for the grand opening of a new church at the Dallas Metroplex for people of the Lone Star State. And following that, it was Nashville, Tennessee, for yet another grand opening. This one in the fully restored historic landmark, now home to a Church of Scientology and Celebrity Center for Music City, USA. Then, there was the acquisition and announcement of new church advanced organizations to stand at the pinnacle of every continental zone. For Canada, a new facility in the untrammeled Ontario wilderness, located on a legendary estate totaling 190 acres. For the 21 nations of Latin America, a 250,000 square foot pinnacle of the Scientology Bridge in Mexico City. And for South Africa, the Kyalami Castle, to minister to Scientologists from across the whole African Horn. All this was made known to Lawrence Wright in the New Yorker, as was the next wave of church grand openings. First in Rome, where 6,000 gathered in the Eternal City and very birthplace of Western civilization to inaugurate a 70,000 square foot church on 28 acres of Roman countryside. Then, in Washington, D.C., a new church in the nation's capital, perfectly situated on that city's historic Embassy Row and just 6 blocks from the White House. Whereupon we arrive at the annual Scientology New Year's celebration and the monumental completion of a 25-year project initiated by the church's founder. It's called the Golden Age of Knowledge for the fact it marked the completion and release of the full library of Scientology scriptures, including Mr. Hubbard's more than 2,000 recorded lectures, now fully restored digitally and available for the first time ever. And to ensure the broad availability and accessibility of these materials to everyone, the new year further saw the establishment of the church's in-house publishing facility for all of Mr. Hubbard's written and recorded works in 50 languages. It's the only fully digital publishing facility in the world with 21st century technology to print and bind books, a CD manufacturing facility for all recorded lectures, one-of-a-kind automation for fast, economical packaging, and in-house warehousing and shipping lines to 5 continents. Again, Lawrence Wright and the New Yorker were provided with the specifics of the church's unparalleled expansion, all of which continued straight into 2010. First, in Brussels, at the heart and capital of the new European Union, where now stands an 88,000 square foot beacon of religious freedom, staffed by Scientologists from 20 nations. Then, and still in January, the grand opening of a new church in Quebec, on the day that city celebrated its world-renowned Ice Festival. Next, in February, the inauguration of still another new church of Scientology and Celebrity Center, this time in Las Vegas, Nevada. And in April, it was the grand opening celebration of a landmark Church of Scientology in Los Angeles, serving the largest concentration of Scientologists in the world. This was followed by 3 new church openings that summer. July 10th, more than 7,000 Scientologists and guests helped dedicate the National Scientology Organization in Mexico City, located in a fully restored cultural landmark. 1 week later, it was 4,000 more welcoming the new Church of Scientology of Pasadena, California, where parishioners celebrated with a newly renovated Victorian landmark, now the local center for Scientology religious services and community activities. Then, the very next week, it was a new Scientology church for the Pacific Northwest in the heart of Seattle, Washington, just blocks from the famed Space Needle. But what truly sums up 2010 was the year-end announcement of the completion of the 185,000 square foot International Dissemination and Distribution Center established in Los Angeles to meet the unprecedented demand for Scientology services and humanitarian programs. This new center generates dissemination materials for the more than 9,000 Scientology churches, missions, and affiliated groups worldwide. It houses manufacturing, distribution, and administration all under one roof and is manned entirely by church staff members. And the expansion rolled right into 2011, when in Melbourne, thousands of Scientologists down under joined civic leaders and government officials to commemorate the opening of the first new ideal Church of Scientology in Australia. The new year also brought the dedication of the first major church in Russia, standing just a mile from the Kremlin and Red Square in central Moscow. The 65,000 square foot building is now open to meet the needs of a rapidly growing community of Russian Scientologists. None of what you've just seen made it into the pages of The New Yorker. In fact, not one of the 24,605 published words mentioned Scientology's unprecedented era of expansion. The parade of new churches, the growing number of Scientology parishioners, or the church's global humanitarian programs. Yet the details of all of it and more were provided to Wright and New Yorker editor David Remnick. Some 20 hours of video footage and hundreds of pages of documentation. It was even all available on the church's website. But Wright, Remnick, and the New Yorker weren't interested in the truth. Because let's face it, Wright's article had nothing to do with journalistic integrity. For long before it hit newsstands, he'd already signed a deal to turn the whole sordid affair into a book. So he used sensationalism to try to garner a bit of buzz, all of which went nowhere. As for the New Yorker, this was merely an exercise in tabloid rumor mongering, all done in an attempt to boost circulation. That's why, when the real story was right in front of them, Lawrence Wright and the New Yorker didn't just publish a deceitful, shoddily researched load of anti-religious balderdash. They purposefully turned a blind eye to the truth.